As you'll recall, last year, after the purchase of the property at 335 East Matthews Street, your board did authorize some money for consulting for us to create a better picture of how we might utilize that property in the future. So for the past several months, Colgan Stone has been looking at ideas. They've had a pretty extensive public engagement process, particularly online, that we'll tell you about in a moment. But I'm not going to talk much. Actually, I'm going to turn this over to Grant Miachi with Colgan Stone, and we'll got a presentation ready for you. I'll get that queued up now. And Grant, I'll give you the mic. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me here tonight. And I'm awful at projecting my voice, so I have to lean over this thing. And I'm really glad to have a microphone tonight. So at least you can hear me. You don't have to read my lips. So Grant Miachi, I'm an urban designer and landscape architect with Colgan Stone, and have a long history of working with the city of Charlotte too on very similar projects with their economic development department as well. So we were very pleased to help the town think through ideas. That didn't help either. I can just try like that. How's that? Anything better? Better? No. How about I try to project as much as possible? Is that good? Okay. So what I wanted to walk through is really just a series of larger context, the exercise that we kind of went through, and then dig down into a lot of the different options that we took a look at to think about what the vision for 335 Matthews Street might be for the future. And you'll see a lot of different options, and we'd love to get your feedback on that. It was working earlier today. Okay. Next slide. And so a little bit of the context and existing conditions, you all will know this, but from our standpoint, if we look at kind of the urban core of the town of Matthews, I wonder if this will still work. That does at least. So, the site is pretty centrally located, right? Along the white line, essentially will be the future silver line alignment. And then, and you forgive me, I don't remember the name of the extension So, and at the intersection of a new street connection. And next slide. So from a policy standpoint, it's really kind of on the edge of the downtown overlay district, right? So it starts to introduce the ability to maybe change the character. This is from the downtown master plan. And you can see it at this time, it was kind of contemplated as a series of townhomes and such. Next slide. From a zoning perspective, same way, within the downtown overlay, it starts to transition to kind of higher density residential zoning districts. And that the idea of introducing mixed use as you start to get into the core of Matthews. Next slide. Then we took a look at what the character is, right? So if you do a walking tour within blocks of this, it's largely a mix between 2 and 3 story, a tall 2-story, kind of a 2.5, some residential, even the commercial types of businesses tend to be in more residentially scaled buildings. So that kind of from our standpoint, wanted to say, okay, well, we're probably not going to go above 3 stories with anything in this context. We had a significant amount of engagement and outreach. So whether it was through Facebook survey, our website, and we asked a lot of different questions in terms of what the future of the property was, what are the types of building elements and site elements that you wanted to see. So I don't know if you can read that. So and we had, Jay, at the end of this, I think we had nearly 420, between 420 or 450 in terms of comments that we got. So I thought that was an incredible amount of engagement that we were able to solicit, and that includes kind of the comments on Facebook too. So great interest in downtown and this property. So from a future use of the property, you see that the kind of top three was either provide shopping, food and beverage, or parks and plazas. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say an either or, it might be an either and type of situation. So that's kind of the top right-hand side. In terms of building elements, people like the idea of a mix of uses, a vertical mix of uses. So ground floor being commercial or retail, office or residential above, right? Much less so if you got into single uses like more single family or townhomes. And then in terms of site elements, we use kind of a visual preference to get ideas on what people liked to see, from whether it was plazas and seating, wide sidewalks, natural plantings, and kind of flexible public space, public art. So you can see that there's a pretty even spread of what people generally liked to see here, with, I think, kind of multi-use path and kind of enhanced crosswalks maybe not being that very exciting. So they were tended to be voted a little lower than the other. So great turnout. And what that allowed us to do is start to develop some different concepts. And we went with the kind of full range from things that are temporary to things that look further in the future, maybe when the silver line is there and there's kind of more transit oriented development. Next slide. Yep, next slide. So the first, this kind of flexible space, market space, maybe providing areas for temporary retail. There's a lot of great examples in the Southeast and across the United States where they've used containers and food trucks and created this kind of temporary environment that allows people to gather, right? And that was really the point of this, is creating that destination where people might gather. And then you use this kind of contemplated using the existing home that's on the site as kind of a support function for the actual market area. The reality is, from a cost perspective, a very developed market is still a pretty expensive endeavor, right? And it's not necessarily as temporary as a food truck plaza or something like that that you may have seen. Next slide. And then we looked at some different options to really set kind of an architectural edge, kind of create a gateway. And if you look at the picture in the upper right, in Davidson, that kind of flat iron triangular building with a retail ground floor, and in this case, office above. So two stories of office above a ground floor of retail, and that could easily be residential above too. About the idea of a nicely scaled architectural feature that really starts to tie into everything down to Town Hall here and the new development to the north of Town Hall. Next slide. But we also started to think into the future of multifamily and maybe introducing different types of housing. So on the south, on East Matthews Street, you see townhomes that are kind of a great transition from a form standpoint from the single family neighborhood to the right to the multifamily, the orange buildings. So this kind of contemplated both a ground floor of retail and and 2 levels of residential units above. So that yielded somewhere in the 32 unit range, and these were large units, right? So whether it's a for sale product or a rental product, I think we used around 1,200 square feet. You could easily, add another third if you went down to, 800 square feet, or what you see in the market too. So, and then 8 units of townhomes or so. One thing we did learn in terms of the what we heard from our steering committee was retail, and the amount of retail in downtown Matthews is at a premium, right? There's just not enough of it. Office space as well. So both of those from a market standpoint seem to be really easy uses to integrate into whatever the future is for this property. Next slide. And then we started to look at, okay, well, if we don't have a partnership with the adjacent property owner, how do you introduce something that, one, approximates the right kind of parking ratio that you need to have prior to the Silver Line coming, but also provides an architectural element and a mixed use element. So this really shows the ability to have 3 stories of apartments, ground floor of retail or office to be able to introduce that mixed use in a kind of building size and form that really fits well into the neighborhood surrounding. Next slide. This is, you'll start to see it's how could we pull this off, thinking about additional properties, these large properties to the east, eventually kind of redeveloping. So what would that look like to make kind of a holistic first phase that fits in with future phases? So you can start to see how that might logically kind of extend as the Silver Line comes in that market for a little bit slightly higher density. This parks itself fairly well, still introduces townhomes as a transitional element on the residential street. And I will say that from the steering committee standpoint and from public standpoint, townhomes were like the least favorite out of all that, right? So no one really preferred townhomes. We didn't necessarily get to understand why they didn't prefer townhomes, but it is a nice it's that kind of middle-sized architectural feature or building that allows you to transition from a single family home to something that's maybe a little bit larger. Those things are easily kind of flipped out. It could be open space. It could be a number of different things. So next slide. And then the last thing we looked at was really thinking, okay, if we really want to take a longer view of what the future of this is, could we find an interim use for the building, the existing structure that's there, and allow it to serve a function, and then be able to make a decision later when the Silver Line is here and growth has kind of continued. So the next few so the existing home, the Frink home is around 1,400 square feet and able to park about 20 spaces. And this it maintains a majority of the vegetation and large trees that are on the site, particularly on the corner. There's a lot of interesting, it was a home, so it was a gardened landscape, and so those ornamentals are actually still out there. So it's a really interesting potential to really make that a feature. So we wanted to see how could we preserve that type of atmosphere as well. Next slide. So we took a look, built in 1940. One thing that I would caveat is, we're assuming that some of the baseline structural elements of this home are okay. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing to assume. I think you'd have to do an additional study to see if, from an architect, to be able to just determine if obviously the building systems need to be replaced, but is it structurally sound enough to reuse for whatever that use is? Next slide. So we did a few case studies, some light food and beverage, kind of coffee shop. Easy, you've all been to these types of establishments. They're great attractors of people. They use this size of residential structure a lot, and they rehab these types of things. A coffee shop. Next slide. Another coffee shop in Charlotte. Next slide. A retail. This from an upfit standpoint is the least expensive, right? Because it doesn't require any of the kind of commercial components like hoods and cooking equipment and some of the services that go to that. So a retail establishment. Next slide. A bottle shop event area. Next slide. And if anyone's been to the McGill Rose Garden up in Charlotte, city-owned property for many years, leased to a nonprofit that also subleases to an event and F&B area. So this is kind of beautiful grounds, very open and airy inside, but it gave that structure a longevity to it. Next slide. So we took we do quite a bit of private development work with partners throughout the Southeast. So we were able to tap some of that knowledge from developers who do a lot of rehab and infill, and really think about what options are available if you wanted to reuse this, and kind of bracket it from the least expensive to the most expensive. So you can see, there are many times where developer may just shell out the building and then let a tenant do the upfit or given an allowance to the upfit. But that generally comes in the $50 a square foot. And that's assuming that there isn't any big structural issues. Like I said, there could be, but we just don't know. And then, for retail use, somewhere in the middle at $90 a square foot. And that's where you're not, you may be upgrading the restrooms and creating a more kind of flowing indoor space, maybe replacing windows and things like that. That's somewhere in the $90 a square foot range. And then once you get up into kind of the food and beverage use is really where that upfit cost, nearly triples, right? So that's where you're putting in kind of commercial kitchen elements and larger service lines and such. So depending on where you wanted to go with the future of this, if an interim use is something that you want to consider, there are some options for you in terms of how you might enter into a lease agreement with a partner that could be less or more expensive depending on how you want to get into it. Those leases generally aren't less than 10 years for someone who will partner with you, but also bears a majority of the upfit costs. They want those leases to be a little bit longer, right? So the more the town puts up front, the shorter the lease term can be. The more that your partner puts up front, the longer that they'll want that lease term to be as well. The shell option gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what use goes in there. Could be an F&B use, could be a retail use, could be an event use, could be a civic use. Many times, and a lot of the folks that we work with will negotiate a percent of sales from the partner that you have in there as a way to also offset and generate income over the course of the lease as well. What this does include is some of the site work that would be required if new meters and water lines, sewer lines that run to the building, some level of parking, whether that be gravel, which could save a few of the existing more of the existing trees, and, site lighting and things like that for safety. So there's some additional costs that you would see on top of those. Well, if this was something that you would want to consider, I think you'd really need to get a structural engineer and architect in there to just make sure to see what you're dealing with from a structural standpoint. So next slide, that might be it. Yep. So really wide range of options for you that look, a few decades out when transit is here, and options that maybe give you some opportunities to put it in a holding pen, so to speak, and use it, for a great civic use and such. So thank you. If there's any questions, we can go back and forth to any other slides or
questions. Mr. Tufano?
Thank you very much. What is the land area of that?
It's
lot?
about 3/4 of an acre.
Okay. And what is the current thinking about how it's going to be used? In other words, is the town going to be the landlord and lease the land, or be the landlord for the buildings? What is the current thinking on that?
So that's to be determined. That's why we engaged in the study process to kind of help inform that future decision, because we purchased the property, I think, Becky, in January of 21.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have a plan for it right now. So this was to help provide us some direction. But we
Okay.
don't know.
Good. Okay. I just didn't know if there was some discussions before I came on board that were with respect to that. Now, is it too small of a piece of land to even consider having a boutique hotel of some kind?
From a standpoint of the usual keys that a hotelier needs for a new construction. Now, if there was an existing larger piece of architecture on there that they sometimes can rehab, and you'll see some very kind of interesting small number, like 50 rooms or less. It's hard for new construction and a hotelier to unless you went up probably another story or so on this. So you're in the kind of 4 to 5 range. You'd probably have to podium park it, which is another hurdle right now, is because the site is small enough that you can get great architecture on it. But it's not large enough to have great architecture and park it at the same time too.
Yeah. I thought that would be an ideal location for an old timey boutique downtown hotel.
Yeah.
But from what you're telling me, the answer is no.
I think it would be difficult. Now, if you partnered with and you had a willing partner and adjacent property owner, the size of the properties to the east here, whether it's this property, that property, even that, now that starts to be a reasonable development site, which is why you saw many of our options start to creep east, because you could an option is to hold on to that, find partners or a development partner that really creates a public-private partnership for all 3 of the properties. There's a lot of different options. But on its own, it's prominent enough in a location, but not large enough to really accommodate too much on its own.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that kind of resonated with me, one of your slides showed something that's similar to a restaurant that I'm familiar with, Farmhouse. Has anybody been there in Indian Land? Mm-hmm. They serve burgers and chicken sandwiches and things like that, but the back of the property has been landscaped, and they have kids playing cornhole and running around and acting crazy and throwing frisbees and stuff. But that place is packed all the time. It's a real family destination. I do think they serve beer there as well, but it's mostly people go there, take their kids and get hamburgers or hot dogs or whatever, and the kids can play in the back. I think this property kind of lends itself to that sort of use personally, but I think that'd be a good use for it. And to maintain some of that beautiful back area, that's got all the nice trees and stuff. Any other comments? questions, concerns? Okay.
So as part of the consultant's contract, they were asked to provide three scenarios, one of which was saving the house. They've actually given us like 6 scenarios, so thank you.
Yeah, we couldn't stop.
They
Sorry.
kind of
Yeah.
kept going. So we got our money's worth on the site plan options. But part of that was also to develop sort of a massing diagram or a little bit of, not necessarily a full scale rendering, but just a general idea of what it would look like from the street. You don't have to make a decision this evening, but maybe next month we could put this back on the agenda and get some, we'll send you out the slideshow so you can kind of think about it a little bit. I know you're seeing it all for the first time tonight, but we would need some direction. That's sort of the last phase of this study, is developing the rendering. And you sort of have to make one decision in this process, and what is it you want the consultant to render. So just, we'll be on the lookout for next month for just maybe a quick agenda item, hopefully at 7 o'clock, unless you want to talk about it this evening.
I just have a quick question. Jay, have any developers approached you or the town yet to use this land?
Not that I recall. I don't know if anyone even really knows that we own it unless they've dug into the tax records.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Garner?
Thank you for doing this this work for us. I'm the one who I think kept championing keeping the house on the property. With new board members, I'll share that in September of 2020, the current or the owner prior to the town emailed me and asked if the town was interested. And so I forwarded the information to the town manager. Her dad knew my grandparents who built a house here in Matthews. And so they built this house, and her grandmother planted the camellias that you see that are as tall as the house. And her grandfather planted a grove of apple trees, which she said were Golden Delicious, Granny Smiths, and a variety of reds. And they made apple pies from them. And she has all these fond memories of it. So just that sort of connection that I have is why I was such a strong advocate of keeping the house. But we have had people who casually asked about turning it into a bookstore with a coffee shop in it, or turning it into sort of like a mass general store kind of retail. And I like the idea of having a market beside it personally. I'm not sure about having industrial pods, which I think is a great, like a cool idea. I'm just, yeah. Right. But that's not necessarily what, I mean, we aren't beholden to anything, and it could be an interesting idea. I just want to keep putting that out there, that a part of the identity of Matthews is these old buildings, and the charm of Brakeman's brings people from all over the area to stop and work and have coffee in Matthews. This is another opportunity for us to maintain that downtown charm, but also to honor the trees that the family planted, and have a way for people to interact with what was once an agricultural town. Now it's becoming something more modern. So I like the idea of tying the old and the new together.
There could be some really, if you took the kind of green area here and, selectively remove some of maybe the nuisance trees and some of the trees that weren't necessarily significant, but also gave the more ornamental landscape a little bit more room to breathe again, because there's a ton of growth there, that you could do something kind of very light in terms of event space that maybe gives you the ability to set up tents, but not have a permanent structure, so you create this grove atmosphere that allows you to use it for all sorts of different events, but it's still very kind of lush and green and such too. So that's a possibility.
Another comment I'd like to make is I think we need to add to the inventory of things to do with families when they come to Matthews, or people who live here when they come downtown. They can have barbecue and have a beer, but I'm really looking for things that people can take their children to. Bookstore would be a great idea. Toy shop. I really like the idea of a mass general store. I think that'd be really awesome. I don't know how that might be somewhat similar to Renfro's in a way. But just another destination for people that have young children or grandchildren, that they could come and walk and enjoy the camellias or whatever, and go to some sort of store to look for books or toys or a bakery or anything. I mean, that for me, that's what I would like to see with the property. I don't know what others think. You guys are being kind of quiet tonight. Commissioner Urban? Yeah, unusually so. Okay. I will say also, the other thing that kind of intrigued me, and at Jay's suggestion, I had to go to Davidson to have a meeting with the mayor up there, and I did look at the Flatiron building, and I wasn't sure where it was, so I just drove around, and you definitely notice it. I mean, it's there, and it's a really neat building. That would require, of course, tearing the house down. But for those of you that haven't seen that building in Davidson, it's architecturally striking, and it's got a lot of uses, and there's some parking there. It's a really neat cornerstone building now. Davidson looks like it's been there forever, and I know it hasn't, but it's a neat piece of architecture. Mr. Urban.
Since you asked, I guess the question would be, what is the town's role if light rail comes through? It clearly is not a useful piece of property from the light rail standpoint to put a single family home on there with a bookstore in it. To make it viable, they're going to want heads on beds or some kind of level of density. So is this a short-term, make it a public park of something, although we have KP across the street? And do we preserve the house, which I think your estimates are low even for the shell, but you're close to I had 100K in mind just to shell it out. And so it's something the town sits on for the next 10 years. It garners a lot of value. And then realizing the fact is that it has to morph into something else ultimately, because there's a demand for attainable housing. That 1,200 square feet is not the 20,000 square feet of office retail that may be in need for a 40,000 population in 10 years. So I guess it's sort of the issue is, does the town of Matthews get into the development business, and you develop the lot, preserving the house, and put a park there and sit on it for a while and become a landlord? And I think Albert will probably retire if he has to start maintaining this structure. And then we know that down the road, there's a plan B, and maybe the plan B is that Mr. Jordan sells his property and you can bookend that house with two larger structures or something like that. But an end game piece in this environment with the rail line being there, there's not a developer in the world that's going to sit there and buy that just for that house. So if you want the house to remain like it is, then the town's got to pony up, restore it and buy it, be a landlord, most likely a lost leader, and leave it in perpetuity from that aspect of it. So that's what you got to tell the occupants of this town what you envision to do. Not you, but we kind of thing. So there, you got my opinion now.
Mr. Tufano?
Has there, in your study groups, has there been any consideration to a visual arts community there? Pottery, candle making, art, was there any consideration of that?
Yeah, in our steering committee, certainly, yeah. So there was a desire, any number of different things, business incubator for local small businesses, arts and kind of community activities. So, those types of uses you would find, a different type of partner, whether it's the, Chamber of Commerce or, the community college or something to help kind of subsidize that portion of it.
Yeah, I was thinking it'd be a great opportunity for the youth in the area and the families to come by, actually maybe a hands-on workshops for each of these art disciplines. And I was surprised that it's not actually in one of the idea mixes. So
we looked more from the kind of form and spatial part of it. And then kind of what you decide you want to put in the box, so to speak, could be accommodated in any number of these. That the McGill Rose Garden is very similar to that, where they have a lot of different events, but also have like like the mayor said, a draw to them for families that can come. In this case, it's kind of like a wine bar and everything like that, but the kids still run around in the back. So it's also not an either or as well, right? So it depends really on the partnership you have with who might operate this for you to do those things, whether it's yoga or arts or a coffee shop, bookstore, or something. Really, a combination of any of those.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the town does a great job of having stuff for all age, all the demographics of our community, but particularly in the downtown area, I would like to see more for kids. We have our parks and things, certainly saw a lot of kids this weekend at our parks, but something downtown where people, again, can bring their kids and just something more family centered, whatever it is, but appreciate what you've done here. Are there any other comments? Gina, you got anything? Larry? Alrighty then. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. We
Yep. Thank you
appreciate
for the time tonight.
I guess we can move on to our next agenda item, which is review cost estimates for potential GO bonds. Ms. Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's another presentation that will get pulled up here in just a moment. So what we have in front of you is based on the feedback that we got from the board a couple of meetings ago. We proceeded to go out and procure more formal cost estimates because we, of course, want to make sure that we have as much information as possible and as accurate of information as possible to know what we think we could legitimately be funding with some of the bond amounts that the board had previously been discussing. So staff did a great job jumping on that and finding some folks who could help us with that. And if I think we'll get it, wait till it pulls up here. And if that's ready to go, if you can go to the second slide, there you go. So what we have in the column second from the right are the updated numbers based on the cost estimates that we have been gathering over the last few weeks. Not entirely surprisingly, the numbers are higher than what we thought we might see. Some of them not too bad. A couple of them went down. So we'll just kind of go through these really quickly, and then we've got details on each. But the downtown projects, which included the streetscape improvements, mobility and parking improvements that would net an additional 100 spaces to downtown, came in a bit higher. We're at about 11.3. That does include the parking lot that is behind White Duck Taco. So that was an all-in cost. So I think there had been some discussion back and forth about how thorough of a parking lot to build. So there would be some flexibility in some of those numbers if the board wanted to scale that down a little bit. Greylock Ridge came in fairly close to what was expected, slightly higher. And again, we'll get to the detail in a moment. Sidewalk gaps has remained the same. That was based on an internal estimate that we feel good about based on right-of-way and some other costs. So that one did not change. The East Charles Street, Crestdale Road, Railroad Crossing, that one went down. So we were happy to see that. That one's closer to about 1.3. And then no change because the betterment cost share for John Street is really just a placeholder to be able to fund likely the majority, if not all of that cost share. But there's nothing to quote at this time because we continue to wait on numbers from NCDOT. The big needle movers when we went out and looked at the cost estimates were really more in the parks and recreation facilities bond category. Purser Halsey came in quite a bit higher. We're up to about 9.1 for the development of that park as was previously approved with that site plan. The Matthews Downtown Loop, we've got Susan here if we want to get into that detail in a few minutes. That one increased significantly. A lot of that does have to do with, I believe, the right-of-way acquisition for that project. And so Susan has some ideas for how to maybe go about scaling down that project to still be able to complete it, but kind of the grade A, full in cost was quite a bit higher than we were originally anticipating. Park improvements went up just a little bit. And then as we talked before, we think that there's a lot of opportunity to partner with the county on the completion of the Greenway projects. The main project that we would like to see completed is build out a 4 Mile Creek Greenway, but there's some right of way that needs to be acquired. That's just really kind of probably a more complicated project than we think would be wise to put forward in a bond package. Because of course we want to make sure that we can deliver the projects that we're putting out to the community. So if we took everything at face value, we are looking at about 33.3 million, up from the original 30. This is anticipating construction in 2024. So it was trying to build out for some cost escalation that we expect will happen between now and then, again, just to try to anticipate when it would be realistic to start to move on some of these projects. So I'll move through each of them quickly since we do have a little bit of time. So go ahead with the next slide. So the transportation projects, again, the previous cost estimate was about 10.4. We're up to about 11.3. And this was, again, changing the footprint of the streetscape so that we have some nice bookends going from McDowell all the way along Trade Street to East Matthews. And then a number of changes and additions to parking and some changes to sidewalks to really try to get as much of the mobility study and as many parking spaces added as possible in one fell swoop. Susan, is there anything that you want to add related to this project? No? Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and keep moving then. Greylock Ridge, again, our previous cost was just about 4 million. We're up to about 4.2. Again, this is kind of an interesting project. There are some potential alternatives for funding, including the developer needing to build some of the street network as part of their proposal that will be coming to you in a couple months. There may also be an opportunity for a tax increment grant partnership that would take it off of the bond. So we think that there are kind of multiple avenues to getting this road built, whether or not it needed to be part of the bond. If it isn't a part of the bond, then of course that would free up some of those dollars to perhaps build additional sidewalks or be put towards something else transportation related. Next slide. Again, no change with the sidewalk gaps, and I learn from Susan all the time, but again, the gaps are the shorter segments that are missing throughout town. So this number does not get to the projects. That would be a whole other slew of funding that we would be seeking at a later date, but this does get a lot of the short pieces filled in all across town. And these are the, let's see, you can move to the next slide. Those are the specific projects. And then these are the more expensive ones. So there's a lot of work to be done on sidewalks. This bond would get to at least some of them, but this I think is going to be an ongoing endeavor for the town to fill these in as we move forward. East Charles and Crestdale. So we did have some good news on this one. So it was closer to 2 million was the original estimate. It did scale down. They're looking at closer to 1.3. So we will happily take that cost savings to be able to cover some of the other projects, but looking to make that intersection less problematic. And then again, this one is unchanged. The cost share there for East John Street near the interchange. Purser Halsey, we've had a couple different numbers, but I think a number we had been working with previously was closer to $5 or $6 million. So this was quite a bit of an increase for this project. Corey, do you have anything to add as far as any information that they had for the increase in cost or anything that we would need to account for? Okay, thanks.
If I can just comment,
Sure.
I'm really impressed that the estimate is down to the dollar. $9,968,000.
Yes.
Well done.
Susan, I'm going to turn this one over to you. I know you did some great work with Alta on getting this cost estimate. If you could just walk the board through, our previous number was just shy of $1 million. If you could talk through the changes that we're seeing here.
Sure. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So we worked with a great firm who has an on-staff bicycle and pedestrian design expert. So this part was immediately turned over to him, and he and I had a lot of great conversations. And where we landed was giving you all the best estimate for the best loop. Okay. So my previous estimate was how Corey and I kind of piecemeal together loops and get her done. But this is the best. This is the one where it's the side path with the 8-foot planting strip, right, to set us up for a streetscape with nice trees. So that's what this estimate is side path on all those red portions, except for like maybe little bits where it's not possible, a 10-foot wide side path. Our tactic is we get the side path where we can get the right of way. If we come across right-of-way challenges, maybe there's a low-cost alternative until we can get the right-of-way to get the right thing. So for example, Corey and I met with Christ Covenant Church today to talk about the section on Pleasant Hill Drive and Christ and Covenant Church Lane. If we can't get the side path on Covenant Church Lane, maybe temporarily we put down some cost-effective pavement markings, knowing that eventually we want to go back and get that side path in. So that's why this number is triple what I originally told you. But it is, as Becky mentioned, it is the right-of-way aspect of, where Corey and I try and slip in side paths and pavement markings where we don't need to acquire right-of-way. For a bond package, let's ask for what we want. So that is the impetus behind this number that you see. It also includes an upgraded crossing of John Street. That blue line at the top of the page at John Street means you got to cross West John Street along 51. That's super stressful with all the turning movements. This estimate includes a beacon somewhere along the West John corridor, wherever we can convince DOT to let us have one.
Susan, has there been any appetite from property owners to donate the right of way?
Yeah, I mean,
it's an amenity.
It is.
If I had, Higdon, whatever, I'd say, sure, build it. That's a nice thing. I'd like to have that on my property for free, but I wouldn't want to have a money grab for the right to build it.
For many of the projects that we build, we do get donations. The little East Matthews Street section from Trade to Novant, that was all on donated right of way. But in some cases, there's maybe some trees that get taken out. We pay a little bit towards that to compensate for them to replant. But we can't guarantee it.
But you ask for it in all cases?
We do, unless it's federally funded, then we are required to provide appraisal and compensation. And this little piece we're getting on Ames Street for the sidewalk widening, the property owner said, undeveloped parcel is fine. The parcel in front of my house, let's talk. Okay. So that's great. He worked with us. And so we paid half the amount that I had originally estimated for right of way in that case. And so I think the way that Becky and CJ and I are looking at these projects is, let's not assume the property owner is going to donate. Let's assume we should cover ourselves in case there is. We don't want one person to be the holdout. If we can offer them a couple $1,000s for that to connect this loop, let's plan for that instead. That's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. The park improvements, this was taking the original estimates, and Corey, I think, contacted, there was a contractor, there was utility placements, the actual vendors for some of this equipment. So a lot of different contact was made to update some of these numbers and then put a cost escalator on it, looking to project some of the numbers forward. This is, kind of one of those examples of, if the board was, looking for some cost savings, could you, pare some of these down? Could you put them into regular budgets instead of into a bond package? We do think that, bathrooms would likely get a lot of positive feedback on knowing that by approving the bond, that there would be some bathrooms coming out of it. So there can be some positive information giving when it comes to some of the things on this list that we think would be attractive to the community. But it is a lot of piecemeal. So there would be an ability to carve out and fund differently if desired.
Can I ask a question on that one?
Sure.
Yeah. A little interesting to determine how 4 of the items came out to exactly $116,309.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So Corey's original estimate of $100,000 was deemed to be accurate. And so this just happens to be the escalator on top of it. So adding, it was a 5 or 6% annual escalator, happened to land on that. So all of them, the original cost, if we were to go out and do them today, was expected to be right at $100,000 each.
That is a segue to a question that I was eventually going to ask, and that was how much was the escalator per year?
Yep.
And 5 or 6%, and seems a little conservative these days and times.
So that came directly from Alta, was the company that provided that. They felt like perhaps in 2023 it might be a little bit higher, but then they did expect a little bit of a slowing that averaged out to a 5 or 6% annual.
Okay, thank you.
And again, with the Greenway projects, we think there's a lot of partnership opportunity here. We understand that at the county level, they may be looking to pursue some additional types of funding for their Greenway system. So if there were dollars left over or a bond package total were increased, we would certainly love to have some dollars to put towards greenways, to put towards matching. But there's so much up in the air that right now it felt like there might be a better opportunity to direct the dollars towards projects that we know we can deliver, which was why we chose to focus on the other projects. So where does that leave us? There's no action that the board will have to take tonight. It is on your agenda to discuss during your regular meeting. But what the board is going to need to make some decisions on, if not tonight, then likely at your next meeting, would be kind of what to do with this information. If there is a desire to reduce costs, if you really liked the $10 million and $20 million thresholds for parks and recreation and transportation projects, then you would be looking to either have to perhaps remove some projects or reduce some of the project scopes, or choose a few projects. And those are the ones that we move forward with as far as informing our community. And then if there are dollars left over, we could move on to the other ones, but just making sure that we don't overshoot with what we think we can deliver for those totals. if there is a desire to move forward with all of the projects at their full scope, then the options that the board would have would be to either increase those bond totals. So you're asking for some figure higher than 20 and higher than 10, or just understand that those amounts may not be able to deliver all of those projects. So if they don't, then a future board would need to be prepared to fund the projects some other way. Could be a fund balance appropriation. It could be, an additional tax or fee to generate additional revenue to cover those costs. But we just want to make sure that we're going in kind of with eyes wide open. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Mr. Spano?
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate again, I think Charlie talked to this, as far as on the ballot itself, it's just the categories.
That's correct.
And any segmentation is only part of public awareness.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Urban?
What is your built-in contingency percentage?
I am going to look to Susan for that.
Because it says everywhere is contingency included, contingency included.
Mhm.
What is that magical number?
The magical number for contingency on the transportation items in the Matthews downtown loop is 20%. Typically, you see me estimate it at 40%, but typically you're seeing me estimate for NCDOT funded projects. Alta and I talked about that contingency amount, and they said because it's going to be locally funded and locally managed, we have more control over those costs and increases. Whereas with DOT funded projects, it's more, there's more unknowns.
Can you repeat that number? What did you say, 14?
20.
20%.
So
Oh, yeah, 14.
typically I estimate it at 40, which is a lot.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, Commissioner, you done? No. Excuse me. I want to salute the town manager and the staff for doing this exercise, because there's nothing worse we can do is to go do this bond and then say, oh, sorry, we don't have enough money. So thank you. We don't want an NCDOT situation where we miss miss the mark by a considerable amount. So thank you for doing this exercise. I think we'll have more discussion during our regular meeting. I also appreciate the thought of doing stuff the right way and doing it in a quality manner, like the loop project, and not doing it half something else. That's not, these are decisions that we're going to live with, that are going to be around for multiple decades, and we want to do them right. I would rather do fewer projects and do them correctly than to do a bunch of projects that are not too good. So, any other comments, questions?
And particular thanks to Susan and Corey. This was a very big undertaking to get this information pulled together in such short order, and they made it happen. So thank you to both of you.
Right.
Just so I'm clear, what was our original bond set for, money-wise?
20 and 10, is that correct?
So the board hasn't officially taken that action, but you've been coalescing around 20 million for transportation and 10 million for parks and recreation.
So about 30.
30 total, yes.
So we are 33, 34-ish.
As estimated, yep, we're at 33.3.
Okay.
All right. Anything further? You have anything else, Becky?
I do not.
All right.
Thank you.
Take a break and let's regroup a few minutes before 7. Thank you.